Want to watch football without the restrictions of blackouts or cable? Check out expressvpn.com to help you get access to all the live games. Sign up today using the link in the description to get 3 free months.
Kia ora, Bowl fam. It's the director. Chargers fans. Well, that didn't exactly go according to plan. Now, did it? The Chargers dropped their first game of the season, the home opener versus the Miami Dolphins, and this has led Chargers fans to scream to the heavens, now is the perfect time to panic! I'm here to tell you guys today, I think there's a lot of good stuff to take from this game. Let's start this video off by saying, hey man, Bowl fam, it's all right. For one, it's all right to be angry. I think this is one the Chargers should absolutely have won. But on the other side, I think it's all right in terms of looking towards the potential for the rest of the season for the Chargers. This season is not over yet, and the first game is not all defining. And that's what we're going to try and dissect in today's video. A little bit different than most of our post-game videos. We're going to go ahead and call this one Panic, Reach, or Preach. We're going to talk about several different aspects of this game and whether or not I think it's something we should legitimately be worried about and panic, if it's something I think is maybe a bit of a reach, not as big of a concern as it's being made out in the public right now, or Preach, something that I think is absolutely correct about the Chargers in helping us move forward past this game. If anything, again, I know it's disappointing. There was a lot of lead up to this game, a lot of hype in the offseason, a lot of things we saw fitting together to give us a lot of hope going into the season, and to lose your first game is definitely demoralizing. But the Miami Dolphins, a very, very good team, and absolutely not a reason to give up on the season quite yet. Week 1 of 18. We got a few games to go. So before we do get started, guys, shout out to the sponsor, Underdog Fantasy. Raise your hand if you guys got in on the action this last weekend. I absolutely did. I did walk away with a little cheddar. It was pretty nice. If you guys want to get in on the action, use code DIRECTOR to match your first deposit up to $100. That's right. We'll double your deposit up to $100. It's a great way to support the channel. Have some fun along the way. And if you guys like to take advantage of deals, Underdog does provide these special engagements. If you guys want to go follow them on Twitter or on X, the Underdog Picks section, you'll find a lot of these every single week. And this week it's the 100K Sundays, where one entry is all it takes, right? If you match one of the entries that they post online, you'll be in the running for 100K. And I think they're doing this for the remainder of the season. Should be pretty interesting. Hopefully one of the Bolt fam does walk away with one of those entries. Well, guys, before we do kick off, hit us up with a like and sub if you do enjoy this Chargers content. The small amount of time you guys take to hit the like, sub, and bell notification helps me out a lot. Let's get into this Panic, Reach, or Preach episode. Lights, camera, action. Your Chargers versus Dolphins post-game report, Panic, Reach, or Preach edition for week 1 of the Chargers season. Let's go ahead and open things up right away. Of course, normally in these post-game reports, we'll show you guys some statage. We'll show you guys some things to be concerned in the last game. This time, we're doing things a little bit different. I have a whole bunch of talking points that have been kind of arising from the Chargers fans over the last couple of days since that loss to the Dolphins. And we're going to kind of hit our mark, or at least opinion, on a lot of these different remarks that we've been hearing on social media. The first one being, and you guys can go ahead and follow along in the comment section below. Let me know if it's a reach, preach, maybe a legitimate reason to panic. The first segment revolving around Coach Staley. It is time to fire Coach Brandon Staley after week 1 of the 2023 season. Now, I'm going to go ahead, and again, I don't know how I'm going to label this. Are we going to say reach every time at the beginning, or preach, or whatever? I think to kick this one off, I will say it's a little bit of a reach, okay, but not completely out of the realm quite yet. And let me explain to you guys why I think that. Now, for one, the reason I think a lot of Chargers fans are making this statement right now is because of how spectacularly horrible of a performance we saw from the defense. I think if you were to ask any Chargers fan right now, they would tell you that this game, in particular, this unit, is probably responsible for the loss versus the Dolphins. The defense very much so underperformed, underwhelming, and maybe even undercoached by the Chargers head coach, defensive-minded head coach Brandon Staley. And I do think I follow along in that narrative quite a bit. I think the Chargers offense absolutely carried this team this week, and the defense, which has received a lot of hype, it's received a lot of resources in terms of, money allotted to superstar players, and we do feature a defensive defensive-minded head coach leading the whole operation underperformed by quite a bit. And I do think the biggest reason for that, and unfortunately, I'm going to have to bring back the name of Joe Lombardi in this video segment. It follows along the footsteps of what I saw in terms of stubbornness in order not to adjust, like we saw from Joe Lombardi in the offense last season. And what I mean by that is it feels like there was a plan going into this game in terms of how the Chargers want to run their defense. Something we saw that worked a lot last year was not quite seen much this year in terms of press coverage in order to help the Chargers create a little bit of time in disrupting those lanes for those wide receivers and giving the pass rush a little extra help into getting to the quarterback. Did not see much of that at all this week. As a matter of fact, but we saw mainly of, which is something I'm actually a big fan of, is a lot of man coverage. I think the Chargers ran 80% man coverage this week, which is something I think the Chargers should continue to pursue, but you have to be aware of personnel. And that's a big thing I think the Chargers have struggled with the last couple of seasons, more so on offense last year, but this season on defense, trying to throw man coverage primarily against Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle. More often than not, it's not going to work out for you. And that's going to hurt every level of the defense, I should say. The pass rush is not going to get a lot of time to get to the quarterback. Tua's going to have a lot of opportunity to get rid of the ball very quickly. And I think that's one of the biggest strengths and advantages that the Miami Dolphins took advantage of this week in order to take down the Chargers and really make the defense a non-existent factor in week one. And I think at the helm of it all, Brandon Staley does need to take responsibility for the lack of adjustments that we saw throughout the entirety of the game. Rushing for, hoping the man coverage could, clamp things down enough time to give Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack to get to the quarterback. That's a formula I think I want to see the Chargers pursue for the majority of this season, but you have to take every week individually. This week we're going up against a pair of speedsters in Tyreek and Jalen Waddle, and yes, a very accurate quarterback in Tua Tagovailoa. This was, I think, not the week to stubbornly say, hey, we're digging our heels in the ground. This is what we're going to do until we get it right. I think this week, you take a look at what's happening. You take a look at, how quickly Tyreek is getting past his coverage, how he's burning every single DB on this defense, and you say, we got to do something a little bit different. And they did so a couple of times, but not enough to make an impact. And I think that was obviously just rushing more than 4. I think that was something that we saw a bit of success from. I think it was a nickel blitz from Jasir Taylor, I do believe, that almost got home versus Tua. That did shake things up. And I was wondering, since that play, why not add a little bit more to it? So in this segment, is it time to fire Brandon Staley? I will say it is a reach. It's week 1, right? I think give it a few more weeks. If it really does continue to trend this way, then of course that opinion is going to change. But to say it's time to fire Brandon Staley would also say it's maybe time to give up on the season. Maybe that's not the case. Maybe people really do believe that elevating a Kellen Moore would give the Chargers a better opportunity to win, go to the big game. Me personally, I think that we got to give it a little bit more time. It is week 1 after all, but I will say that seat is getting nice and warm after week 1 because we did see some trends continuing from last season. And if Brandon Staley wants to avoid that narrative altogether, he's going to have to force himself to adjust and be malleable to whatever the game and the opponent offers him on a weekly basis. All right? So probably the longest segment of the video. Let's move on to the next one. Next take, Kellen Moore is legit and is going to lead the Chargers to a top 5 offense in the 2023 season. I've been seeing this one a lot. And I think, honestly, guys, you take a look at week 1. I don't know if the Chargers scored in terms of top 5 in points scored this week. I know the Cowboys put up 40. Obviously, the Dolphins put up 36. But I wouldn't be surprised if the Chargers did place a top 5 team in points scored. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if this was a trend that we start to see snowball throughout the course of the season. Because, of course, this is something that I think, in terms of the Chargers offseason, received the most hype, received the most praise. Kellen Moore coming in relief of a Joe Lombardi is going to completely change what this offense looks like. And I think we finally saw our first preview of what this offense can look like under a competent offensive coordinator that understands the strengths and weaknesses of this team. And I think the fundamentals of football altogether. A big thing that we saw in the Chargers offense was the ability to run the football. That's going to get its own segment here in just a second, but that's a very important aspect to any football team. And I feel like the Chargers, if you were to ask me over the course of this last offseason, like if the Chargers are going to be a pure running team, where would they rank as far as offense? I'd be like, we're good, but I view this Chargers running back room more as a receiving kind of style. You know what I mean? Austin Eckler is more of your receiving back, and that's something that was really established in the Joe Lombardi era. You definitely see, a Joshua Kelly maybe with some of those aspects as well. But I didn't know if I felt as confident in the Chargers being a dominant rushing team behind the running backs that we have right now. And that, again, doesn't speak illy of Austin Eckler or anything like that. It just speaks to what kind of style I think the Chargers have in terms of personnel. I was absolutely proven wrong. This is something that Kellen Moore lives and breathes by. He absolutely understands how to design an offense around the strengths and weaknesses of his team, his offensive line. They run a certain way. The Chargers running backs, they run a certain way. And he was able to find a nice balance. And I think that absolutely helped out the Chargers in terms of their passing offense. Of course, we didn't see monster numbers like Tua and Tyreek Hill, but we saw healthy numbers and opportunities for Justin Herbert, who is getting in the grasp and into the groove of this new offensive scheme, mind you. I think I really like what Kellen Moore is throwing out there. And in terms of, is this going to produce a top 5 offense in the league? I think absolutely, yeah. We're going to go preach on this one. Preach, director, preach, Bolt fam. I think we keep this up. If the run offense continues to be this good, which again could vary on a weekly basis depending on opponent, and if the Chargers can remain this balanced and this efficient, put up this many points, 30 or more or close to it, I think absolutely the Chargers could be that team to beat on offense in 2023. Kellen Moore, welcome to the Chargers. We are very happy to see you here. Of course, he's not perfect. There's some things I wish, that we can clean up and get better at, but this is by far miles away better than what we saw with Joe Lombardi off the bat. All right? Next up, this next segment kind of piggybacking off of that last one. The Chargers will be one of the best running teams in the NFL. I'm going to say preach. I'm going to say preach right off the bat on this one. If the Chargers, again, can keep up what we saw in week 1, behind, again, this is an Austin Eckler-led run game, which he is dealing with an injury right now. This is a Joshua Kelly, 1-2 punch all of a sudden. These guys put up pretty similar numbers with similar carries. I think absolutely this team could absolutely be one of the best running teams in the NFL. And again, I think it also comes through in evidence of last season and seasons previous of Kellen Moore and the Dallas Cowboys. Very healthy passing offense, but underlying it all and underneath it all, at the foundation of everything, was a very healthy run game. And I think Austin Eckler and Joshua Kelly proved to me that we have the personnel, and of course we've got the play caller to make that happen. So I will say Chargers, one of the best running teams in the NFL. I'm going to say preach on that. And when I say one of the best, I think most of the time I say like top 5, top 10. In this case, I think top 10 absolutely in terms of running team, which is a huge jump from last year. I think the Chargers ranking in the bottom 3 last year, going from bottom 3 to top 10, I think is a very, very nice improvement to the Chargers run game, which ultimately is going to help the offense as a whole. Next up, this is going to be a big one, guys, and a lot of you guys are probably skipping through the video like, where's director talking about this? Where's the J.C. Jackson segment? Well, here it is, Bo fam. J.C. Jackson is officially a liability. All right. Now, this is despite J.C. logging his first interception since the 2021 season. We have a lot to worry about with JC. Now, in the interception, I'm going to give him credit. Yes, it's great to see JC going out there and playing to his strengths, and that's generating turnovers. But even in that play, Chargers fans were a little, like I was overwhelmed with the hype. Like, oh my God, finally, JC Jackson comes down with that interception. We've been waiting so long for it. And then he kind of bastardizes it a little bit by running it out of the end zone in and around, getting down around the 5-yard line. I was like, oh, that's not good. That is definitely not good. That's not something you like to see. Create a turnover and then put your offense in a tough position where they have to drive almost the full length of the field. That's very, very tough. And that kind of speaks to the theme, the overarching theme of a J.C. Jackson's performance this week. Now, I'm not going to put it all on J.C. Like I mentioned in the Brandon Staley segment, I think the play calling and I think the plan versus the Dolphins wasn't quite what I would have hoped it would be, and that led to a lot of J.C. Jackson just getting straight up burned by Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. And there's things that you can do to try and alleviate that. We saw no press. I think J.C.'s okay in press, right? I think that's something I would like to see. I think J.C.'s great in man, but not versus these particular speedsters of this team. We're not going to be done. We're going to see a few more players with a lot of speed, but by far and away, this is going to be the toughest one on our entire docket this year. Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, those two are a different breed, and we didn't see the system or the scheme help him out in any way, shape, or form this week. Now, does that alleviate and forgive all of his mistakes? Absolutely not. That's what I was talking about. The overarching theme here with JC was the decision making, the mistakes. JC, for a player that's being paid as much as he is and coming in with as much experience as he is, and generally being touted as the Chargers' #1 cornerback, he needs to make flawless decisions in the moment. And yes, he's probably lost a step or out of practice. He didn't play a majority of the entire last season, but some of the decisions that we saw this week was pretty bad from the veteran corner. From running it out of the end zone on the interception to forcing a defensive pass interference seconds before the first half was over, resulting in 3 points by the Dolphins, which ultimately the Chargers lose by 2. There's a lot there. I will say in defense of J.C. Jackson, though, the coverage does look a little bit better, even though he was getting burned by the speedsters, and there is improvement from what we saw last season. Either way, though, we need to see that improvement a lot quicker. So as of right now, I am going to say panic a little bit on J.C. Jackson. I feel a little more comfortable with Jasir Taylor out there at this point with Asante and Michael Davis. Doesn't mean I'm off on J.C. Jackson, that I want him off the team, that I think he should be cut. No, but I do recognize that something is wrong, and I don't know if we have time. I don't know if we can afford the time it would take for him to catch up. So I'm going to say panic, but more of like code orange at this point. I'm not ready to cut him, but at the same time, something needs to change. All right. Next up, this is a big one for me, at least. I've been hearing this all week. The Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack duo are just not working. Or I will say I've heard a lot. Joey Bosa is washed up. I don't like hearing that. Joey Bosa is one of my favorite players on this entire team, and he has been since we drafted him very many years ago. This is a heck of a football player. He had a very bad game this week. Very bad game. I think graded as one of the lowest scored players on the Chargers this week versus via PFF. Very, very bad. And this was despite the Chargers, I should say the Miami Dolphins, not having a healthy offensive line. I would say a pretty bad offensive line. The Chargers could not generate any heat. Maybe that's a bit of a reach there, right? The Chargers did generate pressure. We did see some plays where the pass rush was an influence on maybe a turnover or a stop, even if they didn't log a sack. However, I will say that I am worried that the Chargers weren't unable to generate a sack. And again, I'm not making excuses like, J.C. Jackson and now Khalil Mack and these guys, but I have to also point back to the Brandon Staley segment a little bit with this one. It's going to be very tough for Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack, these guys, to generate a sack when I have to imagine the average time to pass was very low for Tua, which means that he didn't have to sit in the pocket very long. And that's because of the availability of his receivers. They were just able to burn their coverage. And sometimes I remember in the game, it almost feels like Tua was anticipating Tyreek Hill to burn his man right away, where he was passing, even though Tyreek Hill was still covered. He just knew that Tyreek was fast enough to blow past his coverage. And that didn't leave a lot of time for guys like Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack to get to work. Now, that being said, I still think that there were plenty of opportunities for both of these guys to make an impact via sack. Of course, not every single play is going to result in, a 1-2 second release time. I think that Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack, something is wrong here. I'm not going to say it's a panic kind of wrong, but I do think a lot of it has to do with the understanding of your opponent and maybe the lack of preparation on the coaching side a little bit. So I'm going to say this one's kind of a reach for me. This is a very impressive duo and one that I think is going to bounce back as soon as next week. I think the Chargers and its fans, if I were to plant my flag and be like bold, or bullish for this upcoming matchup, I think the Chargers do log more than 2 sacks. I'm actually kind of hovering in and around 4 or 5 versus a Ryan Tannehill, just because of the different kind of team that they are and how capable I think the Chargers will be in terms of defending the pass versus, guys that aren't speedsters. I mean, DeAndre Hopkins is going to be very tough, and these guys are going to be very good, but they're not going to be that kind of speed element that the Chargers had a hard time with this last week. But in this particular matchup, it is a little bit worrisome. But I will say it is a bit of a reach for me. I think, again, it's week 1. We have to wait and see, but you do hope to see better, even in the season opener, even against the speedy Dolphins, than what we saw in week 1. All right? Next up, and after this week, I think I heard a lot of this, and I think a lot of Chargers fans are a bit worried about this aspect. The Chargers defense will be a bottom half defense in 2023. I think there is legitimate concern here. I think bottom half is actually, I won't say where I'm at in terms of like where I think they'll be, like, oh, maybe they'll be number 17 or number 16 or in and around that. I think that's possible, which is unfortunate for a defense that I was pretty dang sure was going to be a top 10 defense this year. But at the same time, I have to say reach on this one. And again, a lot of it depends on Brandon Staley and his ability to adjust and his ability to change after week 1, because I do think his stubbornness kind of led to the defeat versus the Dolphins. But at the same time, it's just really hard for me to bet against the talent, right? We're betting against Derwin James with that statement. We're betting against Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa and Eric Kendricks and Morgan Fox and even J.C. Jackson, Michael Davis, Asante Samuel. There is just too much talent on this side of the ball for me to be like, week 1 was the defining moment for this team in 2023. Sure, it's not great, and it's not a great way to start off the year, but I just can't bet against the talent of these players, whether or not they're being mismanaged or not. They're just too good. I hope Brandon Staley figures it out, and I hope that the defense continues to improve, or does improve throughout the course of the first few weeks. But as of right now, I just think the defense is just too loaded in terms of star power for me to say they'll be a bottom half unit. If anything, if I were to feel out where I'm at right now with the Chargers defense, I will say it's probably around 11 or 12 for me, so not too far off. But at the same time, it's too loaded. It's too loaded for me to give up on them after 1 week. All right? Next up, and this was a big one I heard all week long, or I said the last couple of days after the loss. The Chargers curse continues. It has not been broken. And I think what the biggest point I think people are making towards that, because there's a couple of curses, right? The health curse, which we saw with Mike Williams. A lot of us were pretty scared about that. It seemed like it was more of an injury that wasn't going to keep him out the season at all. Of course, he did return after maybe getting something stitched up. I think people are more referring to the Chargers are very good at getting our hopes up here, very, very high, and then dropping us off the highest cliff at the very last second. We think we're going to win. The Chargers offense looks great. We're putting up points. We're making big plays, but we just can't figure it out. We just can't close out the fourth quarter. We just can't, tie a ribbon on this game. It has to come down to the last second. It has to come down to the wire, and it has to be a heart attack at the end of every fourth quarter for Chargers fans. Win or lose, it's going to be tough. It's going to be very, very tough. And as of right now, I'm going to say panic is such a harsh word, but I'm going to go with it, and it's a light panic for me. I think the Chargers curse as of right now it hasn't been broken, right? We need to see a proven game where it's like, hey, this team is capable of closing this game out. This team is capable of finishing this game strong. And to see the Chargers start off the season with a game that I think they should have won, even despite all the defensive, problems with Brandon Staley and all that kind of stuff. I think the Chargers had an opportunity to go win this with their offense. Like a minute or something left on the clock. The Chargers were down by 2. A field goal wins the game, and we couldn't finish it out. That to me does make me panic a little bit. That part of our identity, it needs to be buried in the deepest hole in the desert, and right now it's still alive. As of week 1, it is still alive. The curse lives on. I am panicking just a little bit because it is something that if we don't, nip in the bud right away to start off the season, the Chargers don't figure out a way to bury that part of their identity, it could linger into the season. And I'm hoping that the Chargers bounce back real good in week 2 versus the Titans, because that was tough to watch, and it very is much so reminiscent of what we've been watching the last couple of years. Okay. Couple of lighter notes here as we get ready to close the video out. A big one I was starting to read about a lot was Donald Parham and the possibility that he could overtake Gerald Everett sometime this season. And I'm going to say this is a reach for now. I think Gerald Everett is in for a pretty good year. I don't think I'm ready to give up on him. I don't know if the Dolphins are particularly weak versus the tight end position. But this week, for sure, I do think we saw an understanding from the coaching side of things a little bit better, and this is another strength, another tally towards a Kellen Moore, is that he sees a 6'8" tight end, and he sees that we're in the red zone. Let's go ahead and toss it up to that guy. Let's go ahead and get our 6'6" quarterback, a 6'8" target, toss it up, and see these Dolphins panic as these towers come down with a touchdown. I feel like that's something that we're going to see a lot this season. I think Mike Williams, Donald Parham, Quentin Johnston, these guys are going to be very involved in that part of the field, and I think the size advantage is something something that we heard as far as a narrative this offseason as well. The Chargers are going to be able to pass on a different stratosphere because of the height of all of these players, and I think Donald Parham fits that bill. Does it mean that 6'3" Gerald Everett's going to be wiped out? I don't think so, but I do think the possibility exists later. If I continue to see a bigger usage for Donald Parham as a receiver who is very fast for his size, then maybe you can convince me of that. It was kind of one of my hotter takes this offseason that Donald Parham can overtake for tight end 1 eventually. But as of right now, I think it's a little bit of a reach. But a good start for Donald Parham. I think he's going to make a great red zone target this year. Next up, this is a pretty big one. Okay, so Rashawn Slater is back and better than ever. And that's why I want to go ahead and slide over to this part of this picture right here. Look at this man, dude. This is more of a preach segment here as to, like, guys, get ready, dude. This is such a huge part of this offense, such a huge part of this team, and having him gone last season was very much so felt. Welcome back, Rashawn Slater. Preach, preach. The Chargers got themselves that anchor at left tackle that we've been needing and missing so desperately since last season. Next one, rookie wide receivers for the Chargers at TCU are bust after week 1. Again, this is going to be a reach for me. Week 1, Chargers, we still have Keenan Allen, Mike Williams. They're going to be your number 1 and 2, right? We didn't see much of Quentin Johnson, which I hope changes over the course of the next couple of weeks. I do think the Dolphins were a little deeper at DB than a lot of us realized. They had some pretty good players out there. But again, it's week 1. These are rookies after all, and rookies, especially in skill positions like this, are more often than not eased in. I do think we're going to see a better game from Quentin Johnston, maybe even as soon as next week. That's another thing I'll plant my flag on. I think the TCU receivers make a big play or two versus the Tennessee Titans, okay? Last couple right here. Thule is the real deal. This is a preach right here. Preach, director, preach. Thule is out there making some plays, man. And this is, again, in a rotation kind of role. You're seeing, Khalil Mack or Joey Bosa rotate out, catch their breath, and here in comes Thule. And the dude's putting up a pretty good effort out there, especially versus the run, which is very, very nice. But he's a constant pressure. He's a constant threat. And I think even in week 1, from a rookie especially, like we were talking about with the TCU receivers, this is a very, very good sign. So Tuli Tuipulotu off to a very good start. That's my preach. And my last one right here, the last segment of the video. The Chargers season is over after losing to the Miami Dolphins 36-34 in week 1. This is a massive reach. Don't panic, Bolt fam. I get it. We're all a little concerned. We're all a little bummed. We wanted to see the Chargers go out there and dominate in their week 1 performance. Hey, heck, if the Chargers went out there and they scored that field goal and we win this game, I think that small little difference, which again results in a win, which is pretty big, but I'm talking statistically, talking in the results of the game, that would have changed a lot of opinions here. It would have. Chargers are the best offensive team in the NFL. We have some things to work out in terms of the defense, but my God, look at this team. We're going to the Super Bowl. That one drive did change a lot of minds and opinions, and I think in terms of this game, there's so much good that I'm pulling out of it, especially from the offense. That's impossible. Absolutely impossible. Even if we lost by like 20 points, I'd be like, no, the season's not over. We still have so much that we have to work out, so much that the Chargers can build on, and especially when you're going up against a team as good as the Miami Dolphins. This is a great team, man. Props to Tua, props to the receivers. They're going to be a force this season. But for the Chargers and its fans to give up after week 1, losing to a very good team by such narrow margins, I don't think that's warranted. You guys, put your feet up. Football season's back. We waited too long for this to be bummed out enough to stop watching after week 1. Let's have a good time with it. Let's believe in our team. Let's believe in their ability to bounce back. And let's believe in the ability of the team to keep people responsible and accountable in order to better improve themselves. If anything, we're going to have a heck of an offensive football team this year. I think Chargers fans have a lot to look forward to. It's going to be a good season despite that. This was a good game despite the loss. This was a good week for Chargers fans in terms of entertainment for the most part. Sure, it didn't go our way in terms of the win column, but I think there's a lot to build on. And Chargers fans, the season's finally here, and I'm very, very excited to see what this offensive unit looks like going forward. Hopefully the defense can catch up at some point. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining me. This has been The Director. If you liked what you saw here, hit us up with a like and sub on your way out. We'll catch you next time, and as always, bolt up and stay frosty. Let's go, baby. Week 2, I want to see a couple of sacks from the Chargers defensive line.